At the heart of some of our misreading, I think, and misperception of our notions of work, calling, and vocation today is what I would call the sacred secular distinction. What that distinction refers to is the idea that some things are really, really important to God, the sacred, and other things not quite so much, the secular. We need to explore a little bit about where that distinction came from and how it impacts our view of work and calling and vocation. To trace this back, we need to go back to the ancient Greeks, to the time of Aristotle, who made it, I think, a really important distinction that often gets overlooked. Aristotle distinguished between what he called the active life and the contemplative life. And it was the active life referred to the sort of the dailiness of life, the things of work and the marketplace, and maintaining a home and raising a family, the things like that. The contemplative life referred to those areas of philosophy and the intellectual life and intellectual stimulation and reason, things like that. The contemplative life was the arena in which a human being's highest good could be achieved. Now, combine that with a general ancient world skepticism about business and commerce, and it's not hard to understand how the realm of work and of one's occupation could get relegated into the active life, or what came later to be called a more secular sphere. Now, when the early church fathers and the medieval theologians came along and tried to integrate Christian faith with some of the predominant philosophical ideas of the day, to put it maybe a bit simplistically, but they essentially baptized this distinction between the active and contemplative life, and we gave them new terms. We called them now the secular and the sacred. That the sacred were the things that had to do with a person's relationship to God, with evangelism, with eternity, with matters that related to God's kingdom, in their view, while the secular was kind of the rest of life. And it actually became known as that area of life in which was sort of without God. And that's the way it's come to be known today, is something that is secular is the arena that is godless or absent from God. And so I think that distinction is still alive and well today, I think, not only culturally, but in many of our churches. Now remember, when the reformers came along, they sort of wiped out this dichotomy between the sacred and secular. Because their view, and I think it was theologically correct, was that all of life is sacred. All of life under the providence and sovereignty of God is sacred. As Abraham Kuyper put it, there's no area of life in which Christ does not say, "That's mine," to rule over. So the idea that the sacred and the secular were these two sort of independent, coexisting realms, I think was essentially put to rest by the Reformation, which suggests that there was such a thing as a worldly calling, and that was not a pejorative term. But they saw no distinction between the sacred and the secular. So I would suggest today, as a result, that we not try and reinvent a sacred secular distinction that the reformers actually gave their lives to try and wipe out. Think about it like this. I often get people who say to me, can you tell me how I can take God to work? And I thought, that's really a strange question, because that assumes that God's not already there. In fact, I generally tell people, I say, God is already there at your work and well ahead of you in whatever He's doing, and you should simply try to catch up with that. And so I think what I would encourage us to do is to remove from our language things like secular jobs, because in God's economy, there's no such thing as a secular job. There's no such job arena where God is not present. Now, some of you may be working in areas that you think are these incredibly godless cultures. In fact, I get a kick out of people who tell me, say, I'm the only believer in my particular workplace. And I look at them sort of wide-eyed and say, you mean to tell me that God's entrusted that entire organization solely to you? And they look at me, well, I hadn't really thought about it like that. But that really is true. If you're the only believer in your workplace, that means God's entrusted that whole outfit to you. And that we do not view our workplaces as secular arenas, but if all of life is sacred, all of life are potential arenas in which God can be honored and glorified.